broad-based government, we have seen skewed development and politically the loss of the Right Honorable former Prime Minister Raila Odinga sent everyone back to the drawing board. As the popular saying goes, God takes the best, and it is in this context that I made those remarks in vernacular. Let me also make it clear that the remarks I made are my personal views and therefore should in no way be associated with the community's position or any political affiliation, nor the Council of Governors.
Right, we shall be taking a look at that particular story which has been making headlines since yesterday. Of course, we shall be taking a look at that in our dailies today. Moving on, the Council of Governors has voted unanimously to remove Nyeri Governor Mutahi Kahiga as its vice chairperson. Now, this comes shortly after Kahiga announced his resignation just before a special meeting convened to discuss his conduct. Council Chair Ahmed Abdullahi said Kahiga's unprintable remarks were personal and did not reflect the position of the council. He further urged leaders to be cautious in their public utterances, saying that in a politically aware nation, restraint and responsibility are essential.
A beneficiary of devolution, and not a single Kenyan do not understand that the pioneer of devolution is Raila Amolo Odinga. So you should be the last person to be. A
country where political awareness runs high, leaders must exercise both caution and deep sense of responsibility in their public utterances. Following our statement issued yesterday, we have convened a special council meeting to deliberate on the interpretation and impact of the utterances made by His Excellency Kahiga Mutahi, the Vice Chair of the Council of Governors, and the mitigation thereof. We wish to reiterate our deep disappointment on the statements by the Governor. We still maintain that these sentiments are his personal remarks that do not reflect or represent the views and the values of the Council of Governors. We therefore disassociate ourselves in toto and condemn these utterances, which were untimely, reckless, and unspeakable, especially at this time of deep mourning. The Council has unanimously decided, the Council has unanimously agreed to remove His Excellency Kahiga Mutahi from the leadership of the Council as the Vice Chair with immediate effect.
At the same time, Nyeri Governor Mutahi Kahiga has bowed to pressure and resigned from his position as the vice chairperson of the Council of Governors. Not only that, Kahiga also issued an apology over his recent remarks, which appeared to celebrate the death of former Prime Minister Raila Amolo Odinga. During a funeral in Nyeri, Kahiga had alleged that the political arrangement between President William Ruto and the late Raila Odinga had shifted government priorities towards the Nyanza region, further denying the Mount Kenya region its fair share of the national cake. His comments have since sparked widespread public outrage and condemnation from both political and civil leaders across the country.
I apologize to our mourning nation, to the family of the Right Honorable former Prime Minister Raila Amolo Odinga, Mama Aida, her children Rosemary Jr. and Winnie, Honorable Senator Oburu Odinga and Honorable MP Ruth Odinga, and other siblings and their larger extended family, the ODM fraternity, and the Luo nation and Kenyans at large. And finally, in noting the huge public interest that this issue has generated, I am taking responsibility of the real and perceived meaning of my remarks, and as a result, therefore, I have decided that with immediate effect, I am going to step down as the Vice Chair of the Council of Governors. And as I do that, I also pray that the soul of the Right Honorable Prime Minister Raila Odinga continue resting in eternal peace. The clip was taken while attending a burial in my home village, and my remarks were in no way celebratory. What I meant is that under the current broad-based government, we have seen skewed development, and politically, the loss of the Right Honorable former Prime Minister Raila Odinga sent everyone back to the drawing board. As the popular saying goes, God takes the best, and it is in this context that I made those remarks in vernacular. Let me also make it clear that the remarks I made are my personal views, and therefore should in no way be associated with the community's position or any political affiliation, nor the council.
All right, and following that particular report, Nyeri Governor, that is Mutahi Kahiga, who also doubled up as the Vice COG, continued to face backlash, with Ruth Odinga saying, and I quote, "A whole governor, shame on you." Also, Cecily Mbarila said Kahiga's remarks do not reflect the views of Mount Kenyans. Also, Gladys Wanga says, as his colleague, I'm ashamed and offended by his words. Also, Edwin Sifuna, who is the Nairobi Senator, also doubles up as the ODM Secretary General, says, Baba taught us to respond with love. He'd probably have lunch with Kahiga. All right. Now, Jeremiah Kioni says, and I quote, he spoke of himself, not for Nyeri, the mountain, or Kenya. All right. Those are the words of Jeremiah Kioni from the Jubilee Party. Also, Anwe Goro says his remarks were callous and irresponsible, not reflective of Mount Kenya. Those are the words of Anwe Goro. Also, James Orengo says hateful speech that dishonors public office. And Mother Karua, who's the party leader of the PLP party, says reckless and insensitive, unworthy of leadership. All right. Tim Wanyonyi says invoking death and ethnicity is moral and political recklessness. Also, John Badi says common sense isn't so common. And Samson Gerard Gay says you couldn't even wait for the morning period to be over. And finally, Ledama Olekina says leaders must uphold dignity and promote peace. Those are, some of the political leaders here in the country are condemning the controversial remarks of the Nyeri Governor Mutahi Kahiga, who also doubled up as the vice chair of this, the COG, that is the Council of Governors. And of course, you remember that yesterday he actually resigned from the position. Of course, we shall be taking a look at that in our daily list today later on. Moving on, Deputy President Professor Kithure Kindiki has cautioned leaders against making disrespectful remarks about, let's take that again, and Deputy Professor Kithure Kindiki has cautioned leaders against making disrespectful remarks about the late former Prime Minister Raila Odinga. And speaking during a public engagement in Kachiliba town, West Pokot County, Kindiki urged leaders to exercise restraint and show respect, especially during this period of mourning. Now, the Deputy President also emphasized the need for unity, empathy, and decorum in the country's national discourse, saying leaders should lead by example in promoting peace and respect.
Ako na kijana moja, mkitu chukulia huyo, tutaona kweli tumelia baba yetu na roho zetu sitapoa. Alafu sasa ile kine ni mzee wetu. Unajua hapa West Pokot tuko na one senior most politician, na huyo ni Dr. Ati.
Wale ambao wanaongea maneno ambayo yanaweza kuleta mvutano baina ya wananchi, tunawaambia kwa heshima kubwa wawache. Juzi ameamuru ya kwamba yule kiongozi wetu aliyekuwa waziri apumzishwe katika sherehe na mazishi ya kitaifa, state funeral, ambaye inapaitiwanwa kwa viongozi ambao wamefanyia taifa kazi kubwa, kama ile Raila Amolo Odinga alikuwa amefanyia Kenya. Tunaomba kwa heshima wale ambao hawaheshimu marehemu mzee Raila, waheshimu taifa la Kenya. If you don't respect the person, respect the country for which he worked. Respect the country for which he worked. Respect his family. Respect the values he stood for. Na mimi nataka niseme ya kwamba kwenda mbele, tukishikilia yale mawazo, maono ambaye Mheshimiwa Raila alikuwa nayo kwa taifa la Kenya wakifanya kazi na Rais William Ruto, Kenya yetu itaelekea mahali pazuri. I want to request the people who are trying to bring disharmony, the people who want to threaten the unity of our country by making reckless statements about the departure of the statesman Raila Odinga. Even if they don't respect him as a person, they must respect Kenya, the country for which he worked for so many years. Ni kweli si kweli? Ni kweli si kweli? Kwa hivyo tunaomba utulivu, tukiendelea kuomboleza, tukae kwa amani na Mungu atajalia nchi yetu tutakuwa mahali pazuri. Kwa hayo mengi, mimi nimefurahi, sikujua nyinyi mko faya namna hii. Na mimi nitarudi siku nyingine. Mnataka nirudi siku nyingine? Nirudi hapa Kacheliba? Wangapi wananikaribisha hapa nirudi siku nyingine? Mumesema pia niite Rais William Ruto atembee hapa atuletee maendeleo. Wacha nione wale wananituma kwa Rais William Ruto jameni. Mumesema vile vile nikishikana na hao viongozi tuketi tupange maendeleo ya West Pokot. Ama namna gani? Mumesema vile vile siku ile ingine nitakuja nitembee Sigor, nitembee Kapenguria, nitembee hapa tena, nitembee katika kila constituency paka kule Pokot South, kwa sababu West Pokot requires the full attention of the government of Kenya. Ni kweli si kweli? Na mwisho kabisa mumesema ya kwamba nyinyi ni two term. Ni kweli si kweli? Ni kweli si kweli? Nikisema harambee mnasema tutamarambe. Harambee. Mwisho kabisa mmesema mmetupatia ruhusa tuondoke, lakini mutabaki hapa. Nalote
Right now, let's talk matters healthcare. The National Assembly's Public Investment Committee has expressed deep concern over the exorbitant legal fees paid by the now defunct National Health Insurance Fund, that is the NHIF, during the 2020-2021 financial year. Appearing before the committee, Social Health Authority Chief Executive Officer Massimo Ngangi faced tough questions after a report by the Auditor General revealed that NHIF paid 77 million shillings to 3 law firms to recover a debt of only 13 million shillings. The committee, chaired by Emmanuel Wangoi, questioned why the institution spent more than 240 million shillings on legal fees in just 1 year, directing the authority to provide a detailed explanation of the expenditure and specify the disciplinary measures to be taken against those found culpable.
CEO says that there is there's an attachment. That attached is a copy of the advocate's remuneration order. And she was trying to actually, explain this was proper. And explained according to what she has attached. Now, the Director of Finance.
Right, still on matters healthcare, Narok County has intensified the fight against the spread of cholera, particularly in schools within the Kilgoris area. The county government, in partnership with the non-governmental organizations, has rolled out clean water and sanitation projects in several learning institutions. Governor Patrick Ole Ntutu is now urging residents to ensure they use clean water and maintain high standards of hygiene to prevent further spread of the deadly disease.
Sasa tuko na maji clean. Usiende kuchota maji zile tu ziko huko kwa mto. Kwa sababu ile shida tulikuwa naye hapo, watu wameanza kuwa wengi pale Kilgoris town na pia pale Lolgoria, na kuna watu wengi ambao wanaishi bila toilet. Iposa bado tunauliza tu, kila familia lazima uwe na toilet. Huwezi kwenda tu kwa msituni. Hiyo wakati tulimalizanga hiyo maneno.
We urge all our school children, now that they are going to exams, to ensure that we observe hygiene. Let's use our toilets properly. Let's wash our hands regularly. let us also ensure that the food that we eat is clean. And we must take these messages back to our parents and ensure that all of us are prepared to ensure that we prevent all these preventable diseases.
We are in an arid area, and this water will prevent our students from going downstream and also the animals inside the compound. You know, people use that as an anti-ground to go and seduce them there, give them a phone, or maybe even introduce them to substance abuse. So that is
Now, political heat is rising in Kakamega County ahead of the Malava by-election, with members of the parliament from the region now rallying voters to support UDA candidate David Ndakwa, saying it will be a fitting way to honor the late veteran ODM leader, that is Raila Odinga. Ikolomani MP Bernard Shinali and Shinyalo's Fred Ikana say the ODM party had already resolved to back Ndakwa before Raila's demise. Now, Ndakwa, meanwhile, is calling for peaceful campaigns once the IBC announces the official schedule, urging voters to make their choice based on integrity and accountability.
Hata sisi tukipiga kura tutakuwa pia tunampa heshima ya kwamba alituachia jambo fulani. Hakikisho ya kwamba Malava hakuna candidate wa ODM, atakuwa candidate wetu wa UDA. Na nyinyi mmeonyesha nia hiyo, na mimi niko na furaha. Mahali tunarudi, tupigie debe chama ya UDA Malava ichukue kiti asubuhi na mapema. Hiyo tumeelewana? Tunakubaliana? Tutatembea hapo hapo. William Ruto amesikia, mmekubali kweli? William Ruto? William Ruto?
Hapa Malava tumesema tunasimamisha candidate mmoja kama serikali ya broad based government. Kwa hivyo kama tunasimamisha candidate mmoja kama broad based government, na ilikuwa tarajio la former prime minister marehemu Raila Odinga ya kwamba wale candidates wa broad based government wachaguliwe ndio waendelee kuunganisha Kenya. Hata hapa Malava ninawaomba muunge mkono huyu candidate wetu wa broad based, huyu candidate wetu Ndakwa, kwa sababu hiyo ndio ilikuwa dhamira ya kiongozi Raila Odinga.
Mimi nitakuwa mvumilivu wa maneno ile inakuja. Mimi sitapikana. Mimi sitatusi. Mimi nitahakikisha ya kwamba ndero mlembe. Siasa ni kupembeleza. Siasa ni kupea watu mahono. Siasa ni sera. Na hiyo ndio itakuwa.
Right, moving on, ODM officials in Samburu are calling on the party's leadership to remain united and strengthen the party in the wake of the late Raila Odinga's death. They emphasized that unity and solidarity are key to preserving Odinga's political vision and legacy, warning that internal divisions would dishonor his memory. The leaders further urged Secretary General Edwin Sifuna and the national leadership to stand firm in strengthening the party and protecting its legacy.
Baba ametuacha. Nataka kuambia nyinyi tushikane, mshikane mkono. Ndio maana kama mlikuwa mnababa, msiende kusambaratisha chama. Tushikane kama wana Kenya, wana ODM, na tukue pamoja. Tuwe sasa, hata hiyo kifo ya Raila imefanya sisi tena tuwe na nguvu. Aibu ambayo itatoka ni kama hatutaendelesha chama ya ODM, ikue ODM vile baba alitaka. Ili next government tuweze kuunda kama ODM. Na ndio mimi najua hata kwa huko mahali atakuwa peponi mbinguni atafurahi. Imetokea wakati hii ambaye tunafanya by election. Wanasema wanataka kufanya nini? Kwa hiyo heshima wanataka kupigia candidate wetu kura, na ndio na utaona matokeo.
Fanye kampeni ya amani, na bila shaka mimi nataka kuhakikishia wana ODM, manake siku mbili zilizopita nilikuwa na viongozi wa ngazi za juu wa chama, na niliwahakikishia hawa kuwa hiki kiti kwa mapenzi ya Mwenyezi Mungu.
Alright, it is exactly 31 minutes past the top of the hour. Due for a short breather here on EBN Morning Live, but when we come back to tell you what exactly the newspapers are saying. Don't go too far. All right, welcome back to the program. Now let's take a look on what's making headlines on the dailies today. And I'm having the Daily Nation and the Standard newspaper dated today, the 23rd day of October 2025. Now let's take a look on what's making headlines on the Daily Nation. And top story on the Daily Nation, a story that has been making headlines, that is loose cannon. All right, and there is a picture there on the Daily Nation front page of the current governor of Nyeri County, that is Mutahi Kahiga, who doubled up as the vice chair of the Council of Governors. And the Daily Nation continues to say, costly gaffe. Now, Nyeri Governor Mutahi Kahiga has ignited national outrage with utterances viewed as celebrating the death of former Prime Minister Raila Odinga, with the ensuing public backlash forcing him to quit his post in the Governor's Council. But demands for tougher sanctions intensified even as the incident triggered a political showdown. That's a story on page 4 and 5. And you remember that the video that actually surfaced on social media is he was speaking in his native language, that is in Kikuyu, during a burial he attended earlier this week. And of course, let's take a look at that particular story on page 4 of the Daily Nations. And Nyeri, and in less than a year, the governor has twice been compelled to retract public statements after public backlash. In February, he drew condemnation for disparaging comments about the Maasai community at a funeral in Laikipia. His latest remarks, captured on video and circulating widely, have triggered calls for his prosecution for promoting ethnic contempt. Now the clip, recorded during a funeral in Kieni constituency, Nyeri County, on October 21st, shows the governor speaking in Kikuyu, accusing President William Ruto and the late Mr. Odinga of diverting Mount Kenya's resources to Western and Nyanza regions. He is heard saying that, and I quote, "In response of outcry from Mount Kenya, God intervened and took Raila's life." Right? Those are the words of the governor, Nyeri Governor Mutahi Kahiga, continues to say the comments sparked outrage from allies and opponents of the former Prime Minister, whose death on October 15th plunged the nation into mourning. ODM, which Mr. Odinga led until his death, declared that Nyeri governor unfit for public office. Right? And just in case you saw, the governor actually, as the Daily Nation puts it, he had also, in some sort of way, issued other controversy remarks against the Maasai community and later apologized. Now, he, during the recent one, he actually, sort of came up celebrating the death of the former Prime Minister, that is Raila Odinga, and also later on apologized. All right? Now, what's your take on that? Leaders making reckless remarks and apologizing in public. What do you make of that? Talk to us through our SMS line to 3059, and of course through our social media handles, that is on Facebook at EBN TV Kenya. All right, moving on to other stories making headlines on the Daily Nation front page, revealed how senior school admissions will be done. Now, the Education Ministry has introduced a digital school allocation system for to ensure fairness in the first ever placement of grade 9 learners to senior schools slots in cluster 1 schools. Now, the current national schools will be shared nationwide with at least one learner from each of the 47 counties, securing admission to the top school based on their performance. That's a story on page 10. Matters Education, of course, 100, the number of the national schools that are more than 1 million grade 9 learners are competing for. Students from Precious Blood Girls High School, Kilongo in Munguni, Makueni County, play a game of chess. That's on also the Daily Nation. Matters Agriculture, PS KTDA boss clash over bonuses. And Agriculture Principal Secretary Paul Rono says directors mismanaging the Kenya Tea Development Agency will be shown the door because the government wants farmers' pay improved. That's a story on page 12 of the Daily Nation. Also, Matters University Crisis, and University Crisis deepens as lecturers reject the $3 billion salary offer. Right? Now, the strike by lecturers that has entered the 6th week will persist after negotiations between the dons and the university managers collapsed. That's a story on page 10 of the Daily Nation. Of course, there is a picture there of the WASU chairperson, that is Dr. Constantine Wesonga. All right, that matters varsity crisis on page 10 of the Daily Nation. Let's take a look on what's making headlines on the Standard newspaper dated today, the 23rd day of October 2025. Top story on the Standard newspaper. There is a picture there, of course, of the Prime Cabinet Secretary and, of course, the Cabinet Secretary for Foreign Affairs, that is Musalia Mudavadi. Picture right there, and of course the two individuals, or rather the two men who are alleged to have been abducted in Uganda during early last month. All right, now top story on the Standard newspaper says missing dead silence. Almost a month after Kenyan activist Bob Njagi and Nicholas Zoyo vanished in Uganda, their families are trapped in agony and unanswered questions. Kampala disowns knowledge of their fate. All right. Now, Kampala disowns knowledge of their fate, while Nairobi's deafening silence and shadowy diplomacy deepens suspicions of a cross-border cover-up and stoke public fury over official indifference. That's a story on page 6 and 7 of the Standard newspaper. And the Ugandan military says, and I quote, "We have carried out investigations and searched all relevant detention facilities, including custody records and lockup registers, and found no entry relating to the said Nicholas Oyo and Bob Njagi between 1st October 2025 to date." Also, the Nicholas Oyo's brother, that is Nabato Cheng, says, "It is difficult for us now that the military and police have denied having the two in custody. This makes us wonder where they are. Are they alive or taken elsewhere?" Also, Bob Njagi's wife, Christine Njagi, says, and I quote, "It has not been easy. I spent sleepless nights wondering what happened to him. Every time my phone rings, I expect good news, but nothing." And of course, it's quite unfortunate, the last time we checked, the two gentlemen, of course, according to reports, were taken from Uganda at a petrol station in Uganda, and of course now the authorities say they don't have them in their custody. And of course, remember that the time of that is the activist. His name is, the activist who was, detained in Tanzania. Authorities said they don't have that activist in their country. And of course, the Prime Cabinet Secretary and Foreign Affairs, that is Musalia Mudavadi, at that time, they were silent. Of course, after, pressure from the public, they started acting swiftly, and of course, conversing with the Republic of Tanzania, and of course, they were found. Right now, we wonder, their silence is worrying. Of course, their families need closure because the Bob Njagi's family and Nicholas Oyo's family need their kin alive. All right, that's a story on page 12 and page 12 and 11 of the Standard newspaper. Right, now let's take a look at that particular story. Rather, other stories making headlines in the Standard newspaper. Ex-envoy's bitter divorce, 38-year battle, and disinherited children. That's a story on page 2 of the Standard newspaper. And how new law emboldens land fraudsters, thus matters corridors of justice on matters lands. That was on page 3 of the Standard newspaper. Anxieties await as families of two abducted activists fear the worst. That's a story on, of course, the Bob Njagi and Nicholas Oyo matter is actually on page 4 of the Standard newspaper. Of course, I've remembered, the activist, that is Boniface Mwangi, was actually abducted in Tanzania. Of course, repatriated back to Kenya after pressure from the public and, of course, the family and other activists. Right? That's what's up on what's making headlines on the Standard newspaper and the Daily Nation newspaper this particular morning. Right, it is exactly 43 minutes past the top of the hour. You've been watching Morning Life, and of course, after this particular short break, we are having a conversation about the mental, the mental illness and the mental wellness. Want to understand how, how it differs, mental wellness and, of course, mental illness. We are going to have an expert in that particular field. Of course, she is going to share insights and, of course, educate us more about mental health. My name is Martin Masharia. Keep it EBN TV. We're back after this short break.